Chapter 1162. Old haunts. After Imp developed the greater steel body, there was no reason for them to remain on the shipwreck island. He had already absorbed everything he could from the body of the Sun Prince, so devouring the rest of the Colossus was of no benefit. The need to visit the Iron Hand Island had disappeared as well. Their vacation was slowly coming to an end. They still had a few days left, though, as well as plans to visit a few more isles. The flying ship cut across the starlit sky, moving east. Their first destination was the Temple of the Chalice. The ancient ruin was just like the last time Sunny had visited it, forlorn and empty. Even the wrathful specters that had populated the temple were gone. Of course, he knew more about how the maiden priestesses had perished now. Standing in the central chamber, Sunny looked at the shattered remains of the stone chalice and the bones littering the floor. The walls of the sacred hall had collapsed. The stone plates were cracked by a devastating explosion. After thousands of years, nothing but dust and desolation remained. He wondered about fate and the past. In the nightmare, he had been the one to destroy the chalice and slay the war maidens. However, even without Sunny, their end had been the same. Who had killed the priestesses of the Red Sect in real past? Was it Noctis himself, or someone else? What had happened to the child whose body Effie inhabited in the nightmare? Had the little girl been slain in the massacre too? As usual, there were no answers. Effie herself wandered the ruins alone, her face uncharacteristically somber. The swords she had thrust into the ground once were all gone. The memories she carried, however, remained. Eventually, the huntress sighed and shook her head in dejection. All that cruelty was pointless in the end. What a waste. Sunny remained silent, consumed by his own thoughts. This place held special meaning to him, too. This was where he had become a demon. It had only happened a couple of years ago, and yet those years felt like a lifetime. A few lifetimes, really. Was it because of the nightmare or because of Antarctica that the past seemed so distant? They left the Temple of the Chalice behind and ventured to their next destination. On the island covered by white flowers, Sunny found Nightmare, the real Nightmare, or rather what was left of him. After stepping foot into the field of flowers, Sunny swiftly succumbed to slumber. In the dream he was pulled into, a shapeless wraith appeared and instantly attacked him, burning with murderous madness and frenzy. It could have been dangerous for anyone else, but Sunny had too much experience fighting dreams. Nightmare the Shadow was also by his side, protecting him. Together, they battled the frenzied wraith and vanquished it. The wraith was not the real Nightmare. It was just a malignant echo left at the place where he had died. After waking up from the slumber, Sunny explored the island of flowers and found the remains of an enormous horse in its center, beautiful blossoms covering the white bones and growing through the holes in its skull. He did not know how the black steed had ended up on this island and how it had died. Had it succumbed to the corruption, or had it remained steadfast until the end? All he knew was that the white flowers grew where Nightmare's blood had been spilled. His loyal shadow stared at the ancient bones for a while, then blew the air out of his large nostrils loudly and turned away with a solemn look. They had not gained much from this trip, but the dark steed seemed to have subjugated a powerful nightmare, adding it to his collection. The counter of the dream curse had risen significantly after slaying the dream wraith. The last stop they made was on the island, where the creature of the lake had once bestowed the ruby knife to Cassie. The island was very close to the sanctuary and was known as an extremely dangerous one. Even when awakened dared to cross it, they always stuck to the edge of the isle, never approaching the tranquil lake. Sky Tide herself had been known to avoid this place. Whether it had been because the abomination living in the lake was too powerful, or because Saint Tyrus had chosen to keep it there to prevent other nightmare creatures from drawing close to the citadel, no one knew. Despite the danger, Cassie calmly landed the flying ship on the tranquil surface of the lake and let go of the steering oars. When Sunny gave her a questioning look and an awkward cough, the blind girl simply shook her head. "Don't worry, we'll be safe until the crushing subsides." Not daring to leave the ship, they gathered on the deck and watched the calm water. At some point, Cassie unsheathed the quiet dancer, gently touched its blade, and then let go of the slender rapier. It flew straight up and then plunged into the water, straining under the weight of the crushing. A long time passed in silence. At some point, Cassie lowered her head and let out a heavy sigh. "It's empty, it's gone." Soon, the quiet dancer emerged from under the clear water and flew up with a flourish, sparkling brightly as the sunlight reflected from the drops covering its slender blade. The rapier landed in Cassie's hand and grew still. Sheathing the echo, the blind girl silently went back to the runic circle and sent the ship into the sky. Her face seemed full of sorrow for some reason. Despite the fact that they were practically next to the sanctuary, none of them wanted to visit it. The idea of the familiar citadel without the White Feather clan seemed strange to Sunny. He didn't know who had been sent by Valor to oversee the Chained Isles instead of St. Tyrus, and did not care to find out. Even though it was not their fault, the newcomers still felt like usurpers. Instead of venturing into the sanctuary, the flying ship turned around and flew back west, cutting a straight line toward the distant Red Colosseum. It was going to take them a few days to return to the Ivory Tower. Once they did, the small vacation would be officially over, and Sunny would have to dive back into the coldness of Antarctica and the dirty war of the great clans. He felt slightly reluctant to return. On the last night before they reached the tower, Sunny found himself standing on the deck of the ancient vessel, looking at the myriad of stars above them through the branches of the sacred tree. There was the sound of steps, and Nephi's approached to keep him company in silence. Together, they watched the night sky and thought about the future. What it would bring, what it would take, what it would cost them. After a long time spent in comfortable silence, Sunny glanced at Nephi's, thought for a few moments, and asked, "So, what do you make of this place?" The other members of the cohort all had a deep connection to the Chained Isles. Sunny and Cassie had spent the most time here, but Effie and Kai were also deeply tied to the remains of the Kingdom of Hope. Their experiences in the nightmare were not something one could ever forget. It was a place that had changed them. Nephi's, on the other hand, was a stranger here. She could look at the Chained Isles as an outsider. So he was idly curious about her perspective. Neph lingered for a while, then said quietly, "It is as everywhere else, broken." Sunny smiled. "I guess. The Chained Isles are more honest in that regard, aren't they? They don't hide their broken nature." Indeed, the dream realm was a ruined world. The waking world was a ruin too. And the young woman standing next to him was the Star of Ruin, a fitting name for someone born of two broken worlds. He sighed. "Still, I thought you would have more of an opinion. Don't you feel a connection to this land?" Nephi's glanced at him with a bit of confusion. "Why would I?" Sunny shrugged. "Well, the Kingdom of Hope was destroyed by Sun God. He brought his fire down and obliterated it. You are the inheritor of that fire, are you not? Sun God's blood is flowing through your veins. So, in a sense, you are the last descendant of the being who brought ruin to this land." Nephi's remained silent for a while, then smiled. "I see. Yes, it would make sense for me to feel a connection to Sun God, but actually in this case, I feel more connected to Hope." Sunny raised an eyebrow. "Hope, the wicked demon who spent 1,000 years twisting the minds of everyone living in the ruins, driving them insane, and causing all kinds of unspeakable, abhorrent evil. The vile queen of madness, that Hope." Neph tilted her head a little. She lingered for a few moments and then said, Hope, who had everything that belonged to her destroyed by an impossible foe, who remained chained for 1,000 years but never stopped trying to set herself free, who escaped her prison and waged war against the eternal gods, and killed them. That hope. Sonny hid his smile. Well, if you put it like that, actually I'm rather fond of Hope too. I met her once, you know. For the first time in a long time, he saw Neff's usually calm expression crack a little. She looked at him with a startled expression. You met Hope, the demon of desire." Sonny nodded. "Yes, well, a version of her at least. At the very end of the nightmare, I entered the tower and saw her for a few fleeting moments. She even spoke to me." He hesitated for a few moments. "She told me that the demons were the flaw of the gods. I'm not sure what she meant, though. I always assumed that the gods were flawless." Nephi frowned, then turned away and looked at the stars. "I heard that the gods were perfect beings once, but then they were no more. It doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? I also don't know what she meant." She remained silent for a while, then said evenly, "It makes me wonder, though. Did Sun God also have to pay a price to use his power? Did he have to burn? Did he have to suffer? Did it hurt him to destroy Hope's kingdom?" Nephi's looked at the distant stars with a cold expression. "The gods could die, so they must have suffered too." She stared at the black sky. Then slowly, a pale smile appeared on her lips. "I hope he suffered a lot." Eventually, they returned to the Ivory Island. The sun was disappearing beyond the horizon, and the crescent moon became visible in the twilight sky. The five of them gathered on the shore of the clear lake, in front of a bonfire, to enjoy their last meal before their return to the waking world. The short respite was almost over. Sonny enjoyed the last of Neff's cooking he would taste in a while as he studied the faces of his companions. Nephi's, Cassie, Effie, Kai. The shadows moved as the fire danced, painting them in shades of orange and gray. They seemed rested and relaxed. He felt at peace too. After a while, Sonny turned his head to look at the lake, where the flying ship swayed gently on the surface of the water. A small frown appeared on his face. "Hey, we still haven't come up with a name for that thing, have we?" The others looked at him with confusion. Then their expression cleared. "Oh." Kai was the first one to speak. He thought for a few moments and then smiled. "How about Sky Swimmer?" Sonny gave him a measured look, making the handsome archer hesitate. "What?" He shook his head. No, don't pay me any attention. I just think I understand now how your band ended up being called Night and Gale." Both Kai and Nephi blinked. "What's wrong with Night and Gale?" "Night and Gale is an amazing band name." Sonny smiled crookedly. All right. There's nothing wrong with that name. Still, Sky Swimmer doesn't sound too majestic." Kai looked down in embarrassment. "Oh well, on second thought, you're right." At that moment, Effie spoke. "I have a great name in mind." Everyone turned to her, while the huntress threw a mischievous glance at Sonny. "This is a flying ship, right? It soars high in the sky, bathing in sunlight. So, how about we call it the Sunful?" The corner of Sonny's eye twitched. "Next suggestion." Cassie hesitated for a few moments. "I really don't know. I would like to name it in honor of Noctis, but at the same time, this is the vessel of the Fire Keepers now. It was created to harvest divine flames, and in the future, it will be the symbol of Changing Star and her people. Do we name it for the past or for the future?" Everyone looked at Nephi, who remained silent for a while. Eventually, she said, "Let's honor your friend, Noctis. Sonny knew him the best, so he's the best person to give the ship a name." Sonny raised an eyebrow. "How come I ended up being the one to do it?" Still, it wasn't the bad kind of responsibility. He thought about Noctis, his self-proclaimed best friend, and about what Noctis had wanted: to break the will of gods and set Hope free from her chains. He also thought about Odysseus and about his own desperate desire to be free. He thought about what Noctes had achieved. Who was Noctes in the end? What words described him best? That lying, dastardly cheat. After a while, Sonny let out a sigh and nodded. Yeah, I think I know. I have a good name. He looked at the graceful silhouette of the ancient ship and remained silent for a few moments. Eventually, Sonny said, Shane Breaker, let's call it that. It was a hot, lazy summer day. The sun bathed the northern quadrant siege capital in heat and light, making people long for the cool shade of the ventilated buildings. The sky was clear and vast, without a single cloud in sight. Looking at its blue expanse, it was hard to believe that somewhere far away people were suffering in the darkness, assaulted by cold and dread. The chain of nightmares that was raging in the southern quadrant seemed so distant here. On that peaceful day, a young man in expensive clothes was sitting on a bench in a beautiful park. Located in one of the more affluent districts of the city, the park was full of vibrant greenery and pleasant shade. The filtered air was crisp and clean. Everything here looked spotless and new. The young man was enjoying a cup of coffee as he watched children play on a nearby playground. There was an absent-minded smile on his handsome face. He seemed to be in a pleasant mood. How curious. The young man observed the children. They were so strange, so innocent. Fragile. It would take no effort at all to break them. But why would he? Watching the kids play was interesting and nice. And yet, he couldn't help but imagine what the playground would look like painted with their blood. Those images entered his mind on their own. The images were interesting and nice, too. Are all human children like that? The young man had been a child himself once, but he did not really remember much about that time. He knew that he had been a timid kid who did not start to speak until he was 4. Others made sure that he knew that. At some point, the old man came to claim him. The rest of his childhood had been spent in the dream realm. It was only much later, after the old man had discarded him, that he returned to the waking world. The waking world had felt alien then, and felt a bit alien still. But really, it was the young man who was the alien. Am I the strange one, huh? It might have been an easy conclusion to draw, but it was not so easy for the young man. He had trouble imagining that others were different from him. It took a conscious effort to remember. At some point, there was a slight disturbance. One of the kids kicked a ball too hard, and it flew toward the young man, almost making him spill his coffee. The young man looked at the ball with displeasure. The culprit of his displeasure ran over and stopped a couple of steps away, looking at him with wide eyes. Sorry, mister. The kid was tiny and cute. He was maybe 5 years old with blonde hair, smooth skin, and blue eyes. He also had short legs, which made his run look rather comical. His neck seemed very thin and malleable. The young man smiled. No problem. You speak so well. I couldn't speak that well at your age. The kid beamed with a bright smile. I go to classes, Mommy takes me. I know alphabet too. The young man tilted his head. Oh, is your mom here? The kid nodded enthusiastically. She's over there. Then a complicated expression appeared on his little face. Are you mom here too, mister? The young man stared at the kid silently. No, I'm here all by myself. The child looked at him with pity. Oh, I'm sorry, don't be sad. The young man's smile widened. I'm never sad, I can't be sad. The kid stared at him awkwardly, failing to understand the strange words. Can I have my ball back, mister? The young man leaned forward and said, Of course, but first answer me a question. That game you and your friends are playing, what is it called? The child seemed surprised. Mister, that's football. Have you never played football? The young man lingered for a few moments. No, there were no other kids where I grew up. I think I would have been great at football, though. Ah, maybe I should become a kid and play some football. What do you think?" His voice sounded as if he was genuinely contemplating doing just that. The kid smiled, thinking that it was a joke. The young man smiled too, then pushed the ball toward the child, glanced at him one last time and leaned back. The kid picked up the ball and shouted, "Thank you, mister." With that, he turned around and ran back to his friends. The young man did not respond. In fact, he did not move at all. His eyes were closed, as though he was enjoying a nap in the sun. A few hours later, long after the children and their mothers left, a woman taking a walk in the park passed the bench. A frightened scream suddenly disturbed the peaceful day. "God, somebody help, D dead, he's dead." Indeed, the young man was as cold as a corpse. He was and had been dead. Of course, Mordred was long gone, hiding in the eyes of the talkative kid. Extinguishing a mundane human soul was easier than, well, taking candy from a baby, but he had not taken the body of this child. He was just taking a ride, watching the world through the kid's eyes. Currently, they were walking back home, holding the kid's mother's hand. The woman was in her early 30s and very attractive. She was wearing expensive but simple clothes, of course. Anyone who lived in the affluent district had the means to afford the best attire, but few were dignified enough to not flaunt their wealth. Every time the woman glanced at her son, she smiled warmly, which made Mordred feel a slight sense of amusement. He had no memories of his own mother, who had died in childbirth when he was young, so this experience was rather new. Being loved by someone was interesting and nice, too. Enough to make him want to kill the child and take his place. But Mordred didn't. Even a creature like him had principles after all. Well, not principles, inclinations maybe. He was not inclined to kill someone without a decent reason, even if he wanted to. Of course, his definition of what constituted a decent reason was different from the norm. Hiding in the kid's eyes, Mordred entered his home, uninvited. Human homes were like a titan. They were full of countless things. From the floor panels to the smallest trivialities, each thing had been designed and created by someone. The materials used in the creation of the things had been produced by someone else. Vehicles that someone had assembled transported them over roads that someone had built. The amount of effort and life hiding in each human home was staggering. The scale of it was so inconceivable that Mordred could only compare it to something he was more familiar with, an abomination so vast that its mere existence was a calamity. But really, the waking world was so much more than that. The only creature it could truly be compared to was a god. A dead god, maybe. Humans were like ants, but he could easily imagine them as carrion worms wriggling as they feasted on a divine corpse. He could imagine it vividly. "Honey, come eat." Mordred was looking at the world through the child's eyes. He put down his toys and ran to the kitchen. He climbed on a chair and grinned at his mother. He made a face at the plate full of expensive, naturally grown vegetables and pouted. He allowed himself to be coaxed into eating some. "I can't taste it." Mordred felt a slight disappointment as he studied the mother's face. She was looking at him with a smile. Her eyes were brimming with affection. Being loved by someone was a novel feeling, but what would it feel like to love someone instead? Curious, Mordred thought about taking the mother's body and caring for the kid. Would it feel rewarding? Would it feel burdensome? Would it feel nice? There was an easy way to find out. However, Mordred stifled his curiosity and remained still. As the kid chewed on the vegetables, the mother idly listened to the news. There was a propaganda report on the screen, with a dignified male voice delivering a report. With the Second Evacuation Army en route to the southern quadrant, the heroic warriors of the First Evacuation Army are continuing to consolidate their forces on the continent. Just a few days ago, The relocation of refugees from the impregnable siege capital of Falcon Scott was successfully concluded. Under the valiant leadership of Saint Tyrus of the White Feather clan, the casualties among the rank and file of the army were minimal. Mordred smiled at the mention of a familiar name. Sky Tide was still alive, it seemed. He was satisfied among all the saints he wished to kill. She was the only one who deserved a clean death. She had indirectly helped him get caught, but she had also indirectly helped him escape. So, maybe I won't have to kill her at all. For the next few days, Mordred lived the life of a human child. He experienced the heat of summer, the warmth of being cared for by a loving mother, the delight of playing with friends, and the excitement of learning letters with a tutor. It was all fun, but he quickly grew bored. The other would have loved it, though. Feeling his mood turn dangerous at the thought, he chased it away. Mordred was sincere when he told the kid that he never felt sad, but he was not completely emotionless. There were things he could feel: satisfaction, contentment, pleasure, anger, resentment, contempt, and hatred, of course. And although he hated his traitorous father and Asterion, he hated the other the most. No sense in thinking about it. He focused his attention back on the present. The kid he dwelled within was rather stupid, as expected from a child. The child only saw the mother's smile, but Mordred saw what was hidden behind it. Worry, fatigue, loneliness, fear. After a few days of idle observation, he left the child and hid within the mother's eyes. Life was not all warmth and joy from her perspective. She put on a brave face when she was with her son, but when left alone, the woman allowed herself to be weak and scared. The city was in turmoil. Everything was changing. The distant war was already affecting the daily lives of the citizens, her friends, her neighbors, her family. Everyone was tense, as if waiting for a storm. Many people had left with the first evacuation army. Even more enlisted and sailed away with the second. And now, there was talk of even people from her immediate circle being pulled into the whirlwind of the distant cataclysm. The woman was not a low-ranking citizen. Her status was special, and so she knew better than to believe the propaganda. Mordred observed, absorbing her point of view. On one sunny morning, the woman received a call. Her face brightened as she brought the communicator to her ear. "Yes, I see. That is wonderful news. How long before? Oh, that soon. Yes, I understand. He is doing great. He misses you, of course. Don't worry, I'll explain. We are very proud of you. Can I come see you? Oh, that's wonderful. Yes, I'll be there." After finishing the call, the woman lowered her hands and remained motionless for a few moments. Her lips trembled. Then she took a deep breath and put a calm expression on her face. The woman got ready, putting much more effort than usual into looking nice. Her already unmistakable beauty bloomed even more. After putting on her favorite dress, she smiled at herself in the mirror and left the apartment. Of course, Mordred, who was looking at the world through her eyes, did the same. How sweet. Instead of using public transportation, they summoned an expensive PTV and traveled to an even more luxurious and well-defended part of the city. There, at the very heart of NQSC, a vast complex that resembled a hybrid between an embassy and a fortress lay, large enough to be considered a district of its own. The woman exited the PTV and approached the security checkpoint. There, an awakened warrior wearing particular colors, black and vermilion, stopped her with a polite gesture. She smiled. "Good morning. I am here to see my husband." Woman had no trouble passing the security checkpoint. Just like that, Mordred entered the stronghold of the great and powerful Clan Valor. His birthplace. It felt fascinating to come back here. Mordred did not exactly consider this place his home, but he remembered it well. Not from when he had lived here during early childhood, but from the time he spent here right after coming back from the dream realm. He had been 12, or was it 13? and already an awakened, reaching Bastion first and then coming to this beautiful place. Everything in the waking world had felt soft, but his return was not at all like he had imagined. As memories flashed in his mind, Mordred felt a dark, suffocating emotion rise from the depths of his soul. Now is not the time. Infiltrating the stronghold was already a risk. He could not allow himself to act rashly. His family were no fools. They had safeguards in place to detect him, and it had taken a lot of effort to make this moment possible. If there was one thing Mordred was good at, it was remaining cold and calculating. So no matter how much he wanted to let go, he had to hold himself back. These people were not his enemies anyway. They were just servants. The masters were safely hidden away behind much more impenetrable defenses. The child and the woman he had been observing for the past couple of weeks were not random people, of course. They were the son and the wife of an awakened retainer of the great clan Valor. Usually, a family like that would have resided within the fortress itself, but with the warrior spending most of his time in the dream realm, the woman wanted to live closer to her family. That was a vulnerability which Mordred had planned to exploit. And now he was inside the complex, hiding in the woman's eyes as she hurried to meet her husband. She seemed to be familiar with the compound, easily navigating between the multitude of buildings, training grounds, and parks. The stronghold was perfectly maintained, picturesque, and tranquil, at least on the surface. Behind the beautiful facade, however, hid explosive tension. The great clan Valor was preparing for war. The woman did not seem worried about that. All she worried about was her husband. Mordred was touched. Love for her child, love for her partner. She is just full of affection without a second thought. How peculiar. After spending some time with this family, he couldn't help but feel a little attached. Eventually, the woman made her way to a particular building. There, rows of sleeping pods were stationed in heavily defended rooms. There were some living quarters as well, and that was where her husband was waiting. Upon seeing him, she beamed with joy. A bright smile appeared on the man's face, too. "You're here." Without wasting any time, they embraced. The husband seemed like a nice enough fellow, if a little too earnest. As an awakened serving the great clan Valor, he had a lot of privileges, but also a lot of duties. Awakened retainers had to spend long months in the dream realm, protecting Bastion or one of the other citadels under Valor's control. Sometimes they were sent on dangerous missions. Sometimes they did not return. Even though these were some of the best fighters of the human race, the dream realm was the dream realm. No one was safe there, least of all mere awakened. It was not a surprise that the woman's life was full of fear and worry. Poor thing. Their reunion was sweet but sadly brief. Even though the awakened had just returned to the waking world, he was not coming home. Instead, he was preparing to embark on a new mission. Mordred listened with a faint smile. It is a great honor, an opportunity, of course. Saint Madoc himself is coming with us. Even Lady Morgan will be there. If I can distinguish myself in front of them, then even receiving the support of the elders to become a knight won't be out of the question. You know that I am well respected among the men. All I need is one last push. Can you imagine how our lives will change if I ascend? I won't be gone that often, too. The woman smiled, but Mordred could feel her apprehension. She hid it well, though, not wanting to burden her husband. Of course. Just be careful, okay? I hear terrible things about Antarctica." The man smiled. "Why are you comparing us to those pitiful dogs? The people serving the government can barely be called awakened, but we are the warriors of valor." Mordred was delighted. He had thought that he would have to jump between dozens of people to find someone assigned to the Southern Quadrant Expedition Force. How lucky was he to stumble on a suitable person so soon? From the son to the mother to the father, it was so quick. The awakened and his wife talked, expressing their affection for each other. But then, inevitably, they had to part ways. When the beautiful woman left to return to her child, Mordred remained in the man's eyes. He was going to Antarctica. For the next several weeks, he remained hidden in the awakened warrior's eyes, perceiving the world through them. He trained, he prepared, he thought about his wife and his son. Slowly but surely, the expedition force was gathered and readied itself to go to war. The summer ended, and autumn embraced the world. The man was excited, but also nervous. He steeled himself to what was about to come. Mordred did too. On the day when they were supposed to embark on the journey across the ocean, he prayed to the dead gods. Then, knowing that there might not be an opportunity to do so later, he sent a sweet message to his wife. Finally, he saluted Saint Gilead, the summer night, and followed the noble transcendent onto a ship. This man has a beautiful wife and a cute son. He truly is fortunate. Mordred remembered the days he had lived in the awakened warrior's home with fondness. On the first night at sea, he snuffed out the man's soul and took his place. Taking someone's place was not a new experience for Mordred. However, it was a perilous thing every time. Not that he minded. He had been very weak at the start of it all. Unlike most other members of his family, Mordred had not received an aspect that helped one in a direct confrontation. He was not like his father, his uncles and aunts, or his cousins. He was not like Morgan, who had been born on the battlefield and was made stronger, faster, and more resilient after awakening. He was not even on par with that amusing scoundrel, Sunless. His physical strength was, objectively, laughable. It had gotten somewhat better now that Mordred reached a higher class, but that was his limit. That level was not nearly enough to face the caliber of threats he was facing, and there was no other way to bolster his combat prowess without the use of memories. However, he could not use memories within someone's soul. He could only reflect what was already there. As a sleeper, Mordred had been able to see through reflections, as well as travel through them, both mentally and physically. He had also been gifted with the ability to create helpers by shattering his soul. Of course, back then, gaining a new soul core to create a reflection had not been easy. Mirror Beast, Beastie, was his first creation. Human children had imaginary friends, but Mordred had Beastie instead. For a lonely child who had grown up in the dream realm, having a companion, even if it was a mindless, dormant beast at first, was meaningful beyond words. His mirror beast was gone now, though. That was another thing his family had to pay for. In any case, things had changed after he awakened by anchoring himself to a citadel. Mordred had received his second ability, which made people wary of him, among other things. That was because he could enter their souls through their eyes and destroy them. The problem was that he had to defeat the soul first. During a soul battle, Mordred could rely only on his own prowess and on reflecting the power of the soul he was invading. Defeat meant death, even for him, just like he had almost perished when trying to take the body of Sunless. Ah, what a thrilling memory that was! Mordred's aspect was of no help in a battle, while the awakened whose souls he invaded generally possessed a great mastery of their aspects and tools. He, on the other hand, had no experience using them. So, to win and survive, Mordred had to gain a better understanding of the enemy's power than the enemy possessed, usually in a matter of seconds. It was like giving a novice a sharp sword and sending them into a duel to the death against a veteran swordsman who had been honing their skill for many years. The corrupted souls of nightmare creatures were even more deadly, albeit for other reasons. So how did he win? By being better, by being smarter, by having greater skill, by possessing a deeper understanding of combat. By breaking and manipulating his opponent, dismantling their confidence, and turning their strengths against them. There was no trick to it, just will. It was not easy, And yet Mordred had not perished yet. Oh, and it was also fun. The best way to win a soul battle, however, was to prepare. If he created an opportunity to study the enemy in advance, to learn the details and intricacies of their aspect, then he did not have to enter a soul battle blindly. It was even better if he had managed to shake the enemy, making their soul weaker. So, taking the body of the awakened warrior after boarding the ship had not been too hard. Mordred had been looking at the world through his eyes for weeks, after all. He even knew the names and faces of his wife and son. Actually, he might have known those two better than the man himself did. That's better. Looking at the face of the man in the mirror, Mordred smiled. Then he erased that smile and replaced it with another, much more earnest and bright one. That was how the man had smiled. Mordred effortlessly changed his posture, his facial expression, the glint in his eyes, the subtle tension in his shoulders. His whole presence changed, becoming indistinguishable from how the dead man had held himself. Looking into the mirror with that new smile on his face, Mordred whispered with flawless sincerity, "Glory to the great clan Valor." Mordred enjoyed a journey across the sea in the company of the other awakened warriors of valor. He trained, ate, and spent the rest of his time with these people. He liked them a lot. The stoic awakened Crass, the good-natured awakened Agyath, the carefree awakened Varro, and the other members of his cohort. The sense of camaraderie they shared was curious and delightful. The respect and admiration they felt toward the man whose body Mordred was wearing was refreshing, too. It made him feel a bit of responsibility for these people, which was a novel experience. Even St. Gilead was not unpleasant to be around. I wonder how things are going in the southern quadrant. By now, the emissaries of song had already arrived there. Sacian's bloodbag Bast must have already begun producing the mirrors. There was no real point to those mirrors, of course. It was just something senseless Mordred had instructed them to do, in order to add fuel to the flame of his family's suspicion. The man was most likely going to be eliminated, at some point, but that was no great loss to the great clan Song. Why would Mordred care? Then finally, a dark line appeared on the horizon. The convoy had reached Antarctica. Standing on the deck of a massive battleship, Mordred looked at the gray sky and felt the cold wind caressing his face. The call of nightmare assaulted his mind, filling it with a cacophony of maddening whispers. He sighed. What a dreary place. As he contemplated the view in front of him, a familiar voice called out, "Warren, get ready. We are docking in half an hour." Turning around, he looked at his comrades and smiled. Don't be foolish, Agyath. A warrior of valor is always ready. There was a furious battle. Saints and titans clashed, making the ground shake and the sky shatter. A boundless horde of nightmare creatures flowed like a sea of darkness, assaulting the formation of human soldiers. A massive tortoise echo towered above the battlefield, with a stone fort standing on its impregnable shell. Mordred fought in the battle. Limited to the power level of an awakened, he drowned in the tide of abominations, slaying one after another as he protected the lives of his fellow warriors. Thanks to his swift sword, none of the members of his cohort fell. They were victorious. After the battle, awash in the blood of nightmare creatures, his companions looked at him with triumphant glee. Warren gods, I almost lost my arm, if it wasn't for you. We showed them, didn't we? I thought I would die there for a moment. Mordred looked at them and shook his head. Get a grip and act with decorum worthy of the warriors of valor, especially you, Varro. Lady Morgan and Saint Madoc are with us. Of course we won. He returned to the temporary camp with the rest of the valor awakened, washed the grime of the battle off himself, and attended to his duties. There was a lot to be done. At some point, Mordred found himself ascending the carapace of the tortoise Echo to deliver an important message to his commanders. A beautiful young woman with black hair and vermilion eyes appeared to guide him through the wards. He stood a little straighter at the sight of her. It was Morgan, of course, his sister. His uncle was also there, as domineering and dangerous as he remembered. "Is there news, Squire Warren?" Mordred pretended to be starstruck by the fact that Morgan knew his name, as he imagined slowly dismembering and killing her. That was a nice thought. He bowed and then said with deep respect in his voice, "We received word from Knight S.H. Dad, my lady. His cohort had survived the second night and secured a fortified position. Their report indicates that the divination seems to have been correct." His sister sighed and asked, "Finally, some good news. What about the rest of the scouts?" Mordred pretended to be grief-stricken by the deaths of fellow warriors of valor, as he hoped that their deaths were slow, gruesome, and excruciating. "Lost or forced to enter the seeds, my lady. However, now that we have secured several entry points, the next cohorts we send will survive, honoring their sacrifice." His uncle finally spoke. "The most important thing right now is to reinforce S.H. Dad. His mission might very well decide the outcome of this phase of the conflict. Warren, tell your men to prepare. Once we return to the siege capital, I will personally transport you to the desert. You must succeed at any cost, if my niece does not object, of course." Mordred held back the urge to smile. His sister smiled. Why did she look so much like him? It was a little unnerving. "Why would I? Squire Warren has a sharp blade and his comrades are the same. They will bring clan valor glory." "Oh, well said." Holding back a bright smile, Mordred put an expression of zealous devotion on his stolen face and a pinch of exhilaration into his stolen voice. "You honor me, Lady Morgan, Sir Maddock. We won't let you down." Beaming with pride, he struggled against the desire to rip them apart and turned around. "Ah, sister, uncle, let's meet again soon." A few days passed. Mordred continued to play the role of Squire Warren faithfully. He had communicated with Sation through the mirrors, but other than that, his time was spent pretending to be a loyal warrior of valor both in Antarctica and Bastion. That was another hardship of taking an awakened body. He was not free from being pulled into the dream realm every time he slept. Mordred could sever the tether that connected Warren to the Great Citadel, but doing so would reveal his true identity, of course. Well, spending time in his family castle was interesting, too. Even if being within his father's domain was dangerous, he was forced to be exceedingly careful. The other disadvantage of wearing an awakened body was that it made him vulnerable. Not only was Mordred's own power as a master restrained, but the meager powers Warren possessed were not nearly enough to protect him. Wearing the body of a master or even a saint would have been much safer. However, that was exactly what his family was expecting, so settling for a powerless awakened was a form of camouflage in and of itself. Mordred would have even worn a mundane person, but such a vessel was not in line with his goals. Really, having any kind of body is enough. He reluctantly remembered the long years he had spent as a disembodied reflection while walking to a particular APC. This time, Mordred was playing the role of a messenger. He knocked politely on the hatch of the vehicle and cleared his throat, then said solemnly, "Lady Song of the Fallen, ascended Sunless. Lady Morgan is inviting you to join her in the head vehicle at your convenience." A couple of familiar faces emerged from the APC. Sunless had changed a bit. His sullen disposition seemed to have turned more reserved, but at the same time much darker. Mordred had to hold himself back from smiling. That guy, even though Mordred had tried to kill him on several occasions, the devious little waif somehow managed to survive. Sunless had even ruined his painstakingly prepared and arduously realized plans in the nightmare. Nevertheless, Mordred was strangely fond of the prickly shadow. Sunless was such an interesting fellow and a divine aspect holder, no less. Although Mordred really wanted to rip the young man apart because of what had happened in the Ivory City, he also felt reluctant to. Sunless was a bystander in the crimes of the domains, after all. The second person, though. Mordred's eyes grew slightly cold when he saw the beautiful oracle. That one. Song of the Fallen stood on the side of valor, but more than that, she was problematic. If Mordred had known what a nuisance she would become when first sensing her presence in the Night Temple, he would have made more of an effort to eliminate the oracle a few months later, when she returned to the Citadel with Sunless. But now he had to be wary of her potent divination powers. The painful ritual he had performed in Nether's tower was supposed to shield him from Cash's gaze, among other things, but one never knew what a wielder of a sacred aspect was capable of. Sunless threw a dark look at Mordred and shook his head. It seemed that he was still not fond of the servants of the great clans, despite spending time in the company of a seneschal. Good for you, Sunless, stay that way. Mordred put on a neutral expression and kept a respectful silence while he escorted the two to the head vehicle of the column. After the guards let them inside, his task was over. He did catch a glimpse of Changing Star through the opened hatch, though. The last daughter of the immortal Flame clan was beautiful, cold, and enigmatic. Even after observing her through the mirrors, Mordred did not know what to make of her. He would have believed that she was just what people thought her to be, a picture of a noble awakened warrior, a valiant hero fully committed to defending the waking world from the terrors of the nightmare spell, if not for the fact that the supposed hero was, in fact, a dream spawn. And dream spawns were never what they seemed. Since Changing Star had been adopted by his family, she was going to have to die as well. However, Mordred did not hate her. He was also certain that the old man had plans for the last descendant of immortal Flame. So that could be of use to him in the future. As well, Mordred was still getting used to the fact that it never got dark in Antarctica. Because of that, the concept of time here was vague and abstract. The landscape itself was not like anything else he had seen in the waking world, and with countless nightmare creatures flooding the continent, it was easy to imagine that they were actually in the dream realm. A whole continent of people pulled into hell. No, it's much too early for that. The sky was strange, the land was strange, and the beings populating that land were strange. And yet, wasn't he the strangest one? Isn't it nice to be with family? His uncle's wide back was right in front of him. Saint Madoc was walking across the desolate plain, not at all concerned by the hordes of nightmare creatures moving in the distance. A small force of awakened followed, with Mordred in the lead. They had left their vehicles behind to traverse the last stretch of wilderness on foot, knowing that remaining unseen was more important than remaining safe. The warriors of valor were subdued, but full of unshaken resolve. Even surrounded by unspeakable danger, none of them showed the smallest sign of fear. They were ready to face any kind of threat, no matter how dire, and fight any kind of enemy, be it abominations or humans. Mordred, meanwhile, was simply staring at his uncle's back. How easy would it be to put a sword right through it? He suppressed a sigh. Sadly, not easy at all. Not even because of the priceless enchanted armor Whispering Blade was clad in, but simply because Whispering Blade was Whispering Blade. If any of Mordred's family members were easy to kill, he would not be stuck wearing the cumbersome vessel of Squire Warren for so long. There'll come a day. They walked forward in silence. Eventually, the goal of their journey revealed itself. Hidden in the shadow of an abandoned fortress, a nightmare gate tore reality apart like a dark scar. The whispers of the call grew louder and louder as they approached it, and the bones of slain abominations rustled under their feet. By now, the force brought to Antarctica by his family had explored a lot of nightmare gates. They had started with those situated within the siege capitals under the clan's control, and then slowly expanded their search. This one, however, was rather special. It was the gate that Knight Shtad had ventured into, and the area of the dream realm connected to it hid within itself a precious treasure. The problem was that this gate was situated in an extremely dangerous part of Antarctica. It had been dangerous before because of its proximity to Song's territory, and it grew only more dire now because the hunting grounds of the corrupted Titan that still wandered the continent were slowly shifting in its direction. That was the reason why the fortified outpost had been abandoned, and why Saint Maddock was personally escorting them to the destination. Squire Warren and his people, 3 cohorts of distinguished awakened warriors, were meant to be the first wave of reinforcements sent to help the knight secure his prize. Due to the importance of that mission, Whispering Blade was going to transport them across the threshold between the 2 worlds. Of course, Mordred had long taken the place of Squire Warren, so his uncle studied the eerie rift of the gate in silence, seemingly unaffected by the maddening pull of the call, and then turned around. "Are you ready, Squire?" The first one to follow the saint into the dream realm would be in the greatest danger. Mordred pretended to be stalwart and resolute as he nodded. "Always, my lord." The words tasted revolting on his tongue. Maddock nodded with approval and offered him his hand. The world grew bleak. Then it disappeared. For a moment, Mordred found himself in a vast, lightless space between dream and reality. And then, blinding light flooded his vision. Unbearable heat assaulted his skin. The smell of scorching sand flooded his nose. Slowly, Mordred regained his vision. He felt deeply uncomfortable because there were very few reflective surfaces in the surrounding area, limited to only his own sight. He felt nearly blind. Around him was a vast desert. A blinding disk of an incandescent sun was bathing the tall dunes in a flood of immolating heat. The sands of the desert were flawlessly white, and the azure sky above him was deep and boundless like an ancient ocean, with not a single cloud blemishing its silken expanse. Somewhere in the distance, inky black ruins rose from beneath the sand, scattered across the desert like the bones of a half-buried giant. Hungry horrors hid in the stark shadows of protruding structures. Mordred frowned, then shifted slightly, hearing sand rustle behind him. A grotesque creature that seemed to be made of countless claws was already lunging at him. A split second later, however, it was suddenly dismantled, falling apart in the air. It was as if a maelstrom of invisible blades had sliced it apart. Black blood boiled as it touched the white sand. Saint Maddock calmly looked at the remains of the nightmare creature and turned to Mordred. "Stay on guard." Soon he disappeared. Mordred was left alone. With a sigh, he summoned a special memory to prevent himself from being cooked alive inside the armor, and waited with a sword in his hand. By the time Saint Maddock returned, bringing 2 more awakened with him, there was another dead creature laying on the sand. It took almost an hour to transport all of them to the dream realm. Nevertheless, being guided by a saint was a great boon. They did not have to search for each other in the deadly desert, facing its dangers alone. Who knew how many would have survived if not for Saint Maddock? Finally, the last warrior of valor appeared under the ruthless sun of the desert. Whispering Blade turned to Warren and sighed. "This is where I leave you, Squire. You will have to rendezvous with Knight Shtad on your own." Mordred pretended to be hesitant. "Saint Maddock, my lord, wouldn't it be more prudent for you to join us?" His uncle shook his head. "I am too easily tracked in this cursed land. Coming with you would only increase the chances of the Queen of Worms learning about Shtad's mission. Don't worry, if you perform your duty well, I'll join you soon. By then, it would be too late for Song to intervene." Mordred bowed, deciding that he was in a great mood. A few minutes later, Saint Maddock was gone. The awakened were left alone in the unholy desert. He looked at his companions and gave them a reassuring smile. "Hold fast, men. We need to proceed to the first marker without delay. If we fail to reach it before nightfall, may gods have mercy on our souls." Of course, the gods were long dead. Some might have died on this exact battlefield, in fact, so there was no mercy to be found in either of the two worlds. During the day, the desert was like hell. The small, ruthless sun bathed the pristine white world in suffocating heat, making the awakened feel as if their bodies and minds were slowly being dissolved into the blinding white radiance. Mundane humans would not have lasted even a single day in this scorching inferno, but even the experienced awakened warriors were struggling to persevere. If not for the fact that they had come prepared, the soldiers of valor shivered despite the unbearable heat when imagining how agonizing such a journey would have been. The government soldiers pulled into this hell by the call never stood a chance. After all, the probability of them possessing memories to mitigate the heat and create unlimited reserves of water was slim, not to mention other dangers. Most importantly, they would not have had a map. The rough map created by the scouts of the Great Clan was, without a doubt, the most vital distinction between Warren's squad and those poor fools. Because, while the desert was like hell during the day, it was infinitely more harrowing during the night. The heat retreated, replaced by murderous cold, and the dead soldiers of the ancient armies that had once clashed in this land rose from the sand to continue their eternal battle. This had been one of the last battlefields in the world-ending war between the demons and the gods, considering who had fought and fallen here. Even the cursed remains of the ancient soldiers were too dreadful for mere mortals to face. If there was one mercy in the white desert, it was that these accursed remnants were too powerful to enter the waking world through the lesser nightmare gates. Of course, there were countless other nightmare creatures populating the white dunes, as well. These abominations were not restricted to only moving at night, and even though they preferred to stick to the shadows, Mordred and his companions had to fight more than a few horrors as they traveled across the desert. The heat, the blinding light, the constant danger of being attacked by swarms of frenzied nightmare creatures. Irritating. Mordred pierced the body of a swift abomination with his sword, then bashed it with his shield, throwing the creature back and off his blade. Sweat was rolling down his face, and his helmet felt as hot as an oven. Even the charm he was using to keep himself cool seemed to be struggling, despite the fact that it was hungrily devouring more and more essence. By his side, someone swayed and fell to their knees. Mordred moved, shielding the awakened warrior from a lunging nightmare creature. With its momentum broken, others attacked from the sides, bringing the beast down. He reached down and helped the awakened stand up. Arga curses, "I'm sorry, Warren, the heat got to me." Mordred shook his head. "At ease, Crass, breathe, drink some water." This was the last of them. The other warriors had already finished off the remains of the swarm. All of them seemed tired, their eyes grim. "Warren, can we rest?" Varro's usually carefree voice sounded strained and muddled. Mordred smiled behind the visor of his helmet. "There's no time. We'll all be dead if we don't reach the destination before sunfall. Ah, don't look so discouraged, Agath. Today is the last day. We are almost there." Indeed, they had almost reached the rendezvous point with the forces of Knight Shtad. They traveled from one shelter to another, following the map that the Ascended had created, hiding in them during the night, and enduring the merciless desert during the day. But now they were drawing close to the end of this journey. Mordred shook the blood off his sword and hung his shield on his back using a leather strap. "Come on, men. We have already been held back by these vermin long enough. Quicken your steps." The veteran elites followed him without hesitation. The sun was already falling behind the horizon when they approached one of the ruins that protruded from beneath the sand like a black obelisk. The ancient structure was broken and tilted to one side, its purpose and original shape long erased by the passage of time. It was casting a long shadow, which hid within itself a refreshing coolness. A lone light ignited in the depths of the shadow and blinked a few times, relaying a coded message. Mordred summoned a luminous memory and covered it with his palm, answering. After that, they proceed toward the ruin. A tall figure was standing near the collapsed wall, clad in heavy armor of black steel. Even surrounded by the scorching heat of the hellish desert, the man seemed intrepid and composed. His weathered face was calm and cold. Knight Dad was as fearsome as his reputation. There was a heavy halberd resting on his shoulder, and a pile of horribly disfigured abomination, corpses strewn across the blood-soaked sand around him. Mordred bowed, pretending to be tired. "Sir Dad, it is good to see you." The Knight of Valor studied them for a few moments, and then nodded. "It is good to see you too, Warren. Come, the night is approaching." He led them deeper into the ruin, where a fissure in the obsidian stones opened a path to the interior of the ancient structure. Soon, Mordred found himself in a subterranean chamber that was half filled with white sand. There, a group of awakened were resting, looking rugged and battered, but also much too relaxed for the dire nature of their surroundings. The scouts. They met Warren's group with grins and welcoming gestures. "Finally, we were going crazy waiting for reinforcements. Come eat, guys, you must be tired." "It's Warren and his people. Good, the creature won't stand a chance." Once everyone settled, food and fresh water were distributed. Everyone was tired and hungry, so they spent some time in silence catching their breaths, recovering from being in the heat and eating. As they did, a chilling clamor slowly rose above them, soon turning into a dreadful cacophony. The old bones were once again crawling from the sand to resume their eternal battle. At some point, Mordred put away his flask and looked at Knight Dad with a masterful pretense of respect and veneration. "Sir Dad, we are at your service. What is your intention?" The intrepid knight lingered for a few moments. Then, a calm smile appeared on his face. "My intention is simple, Warren. Tomorrow we will slay the Guardian and take the Citadel." Indeed, the treasure Knight Dad had discovered in the desert was a citadel. Not the tomb of Ariel itself, of course. No scout had managed to get anywhere near the Black Pyramid yet. It just always loomed far in the distance, never getting closer, like an ominous mirage. But he did find a citadel. At this point, both Valor and Song were scouting the outer reaches of the desert in search of a suitable position to establish a base camp. Once they found one, numerous soldiers would be brought there through the corresponding nightmare gates, and the expeditions toward the pyramid would be launched. However, a citadel had the potential to drastically change the balance of power between the two great clans in their pursuit of the demon's tomb. The clan that possessed one would hold an overwhelming advantage. The clan that did not would fall behind before the race even started. A citadel was not only better fortified and safer than a makeshift stronghold. Connected to the waking world by a gateway, it would make it much easier to ferry awakened into the dream realm, transport supplies, and establish logistical chains. Some regions of the dream realm held only one citadel, while some held many. At this point, it was unknown if Knight Tad's discovery was the only citadel in the White Desert, except for the tomb of Ariel itself. But even if Song were to eventually discover a second one, the delay would put them at a great disadvantage. So, needless to say, taking the citadel was of paramount importance. However, it was guarded by a fearsome nightmare creature. More than that, even though Valor put a lot of effort into keeping Dad's prize a secret, there was no guarantee that Song would not try to take it by force eventually. So, Warren and his people were dispatched into the desert as the first wave of reinforcements. Their task was to assist the fearsome knight in conquering the citadel and lay the groundwork for the arrival of further forces. Of course, there was a problem with that plan. The fact that an insidious creature had long taken the place of Squire Warren and came to the desert in his place. Valor! Mordred let out a fierce battle cry as he led his people into the tide of nightmare creatures. The citadel was right in front of them. It was not a fortress, nor was it a pyramid built of black stone. In fact, it was not a man-made structure at all. Instead, it was a gargantuan black skull that towered above the white dunes, staring at the azure sky with the dark pits of its empty eye sockets. There were 3 of them, too, where a human's eyes would be, and the third one above them, right in the middle of the skull's vast forehead. Each of the empty eye sockets was the side of a stadium, and currently, a flood of revolting nightmare creatures was flowing out of them onto the white sand. Hold fast. Roaring such stupid things, Mordred plunged into the mass of abominations. His sword rose and fell, cutting them down, and his shield rang under a barrage of attacks. How tedious! He felt slightly frustrated by the need to hold himself back. Mordred could not unleash his power as a master, but even more disheartening than that, he had to imitate the combat skills of the long-dead Warren. As a retainer of the great clan Valor, Warren had been at the pinnacle of what awakened warriors strive to be. And yet, to Mordred, that level of skill was dull and suffocating. Limiting himself to such a mediocre level of mastery was harder than surviving in the tide of nightmare creatures. He endured the frustrating limitations and fought, struggling to keep his body intact. Sadly, Warren had been a heroic type as well, so to play his role faithfully, Mordred had to act accordingly. He did not hesitate to put himself in danger's way to protect his soldiers, risking life and limb to make sure that all of his companions survived. Stay strong, Varro. Give back, lean on me. Grass. His companions seemed empowered with him by their side. It was strange. Mordred was leading soldiers of valor into battle, all of them connected by a shared sense of duty, belonging, and devotion. They spilled the blood of nightmare creatures and fought with valiant resolve, refusing to give ground. Wasn't that what he was supposed to become, if things had been different? Wasn't leading the brave warriors of valor the fate that had been stolen from him? Ah, such irony! After an eternity of blood and agonizing heat, the battle was over. The nightmare creatures were dead. The tyrant that had made the citadel its lair had been slain by Knight Tad himself. The awakened, both those brought to the desert by Mordred and those that belonged to Tad's personal elite unit, were mostly alive and victorious. They had won. Now all they had to do was reap the spoils of their triumph. The crowd of mighty awakened warriors cleaned their blades and dove into the cool darkness of the ancient skull. They carefully made their way to the heart of the citadel, where, in a vast chamber of black bone, the gateway awaited to be activated. Knight Tad was the first to see it. Bright sunlight spilled through a jagged crack in the chamber's roof and thrust into the bone floor. A gargantuan arrowhead of lustrous steel shone with reflected radiance. A triumphant smile appeared on the knight's face. Turning around, he placed his heavy hand on Mordred's shoulder. "You did well, Warren, glory and valor." Mordred smiled pleasantly. Everything was going according to plan. Now, his task was simple: remain in the good graces of Sir Tad, anchor himself to the gateway, return to the waking world, and inform Clan Song about the location of the citadel. Then, when Valor properly established themselves here and concentrated their forces in one place, he would help Sation and the rest stage an unexpected attack and rip the citadel from his clan's hands while decimating its defenders. However, that was Clan Song's plan. Mordred, on the other hand, had his own designs. In his opinion, the emissaries of the Queen of Worms had allowed themselves to commit a grave sin. They had grown arrogant. Drunk on the succession of easy victories and their outward superiority in terms of numbers, they had foolishly come to underestimate his family. Wasn't it the epitome of being misguided, to look down on the descendants of war while waging one? Satian and Beastmaster might have been blinded by the feeling of complacency his sister had so masterfully lured them into, but Mordred knew better. It didn't matter who had reaped a few victories at the start. All that mattered was who would be left standing at the finish. Clan Song seemed to be holding an advantage for now, but the walls of the trap were already closing in around them. Mordred did not know what the trap was, but he did know one thing: the more time Morgan was given, the more devastating her retaliation would be. So to destroy her plans, he had to throw the cadence of this conflict into utter chaos. Looking at Knight Shdad with a pleasant smile, Mordred nodded. Glory and valor. With that, he plunged his sword into the ascended warrior's neck. Shdad's eyes widened, and as blood poured out of his mouth, Mordred moved his blade sideways, almost decapitating the ascended. Just like that, the fearsome knight of valor died, killed by the treacherous attack of an ally. All around him, the awakened froze, paralyzed by shock. Crass shivered. Why, Warren, what? Ripping his sword out of Shdad's neck, Mordred delivered a downward cut in one swift, fluid motion. The blade fell on Crass's head, splitting his skull and obliterating his face. The awakened was dead long before the Ascended's body fell to the floor. The rest of them were utterly stunned. However, they weren't the elites of a great clan for nothing. Despite the harrowing wrongness of what had happened, his companions, who were the closest ones to the bloody scene, reacted just a split second later. Both Varro and Agath moved, raising their swords to attack their friend and commander, who had seemingly gone mad. Mordred tried to parry both strikes but failed. Varro's sword pierced his throat. Pushing Warren down, the petrified awakened stared at his dead eyes and screamed. How can Beastmaster that witch? She must have forced him. Behind him, Agath remained silent for a moment, looking down. Her body trembled slightly. Varro turned around, staring at his comrade with crazed eyes. Agath raised her head and glanced at him with a pleasant smile. Really now, must you compare me to that terrible woman? Her rapier shot forward. Soon the gargantuan black skull was filled with screams, terror, and the stench of human blood. The nightmare creatures were dead. The awakened were dead too. Only Mordred remained. Sunny stared at the silhouette of a departing battleship, deep in thought. October was now behind them and November was in full bloom. Well, not that many things ever bloomed in Antarctica. It was still summer here, the day never ended, and although the weather was chilly, it could not even be called cold. The evacuation continued at a steady pace. Hundreds of millions of refugees had already been carried across the ocean, and millions more were leaving every week. The situation on the continent was dire, but also strangely manageable. The chain of nightmare was escalating without end. There were more nightmare gates, more abominations, more threats and problems that had to be solved. But at the same time, the forces of humanity were also growing stronger. Despite the losses they suffered and the increasing strain on logistics and supplies, they were becoming more steadfast and efficient in dealing with the endless tide of nightmare creatures. Well, it was not that surprising, really. The greatest strength of humans was their adaptability. They were masters of absorbing and utilizing information. They learned. At the start of the Antarctica campaign, the evacuation army had been thrust into a new and seemingly impossible situation. Faced with an unprecedented cataclysm, they suffered bitter defeats, and yet they endured. Then, slowly, they learned how to deal with the enemy better. Their tactics and strategy improved. Their well of knowledge about the types of abominations coming through the gates grew deeper. The inexperienced soldiers became grizzled veterans. It helped that there were countless soul shards to be harvested, as well. Although Sunny was somewhat sad that the price of the shards on the global marker was going to plummet, cutting off one of the major revenue streams for the brilliant Emporium, he was also glad. By now, most awakened soldiers of the evacuation army had ample chances to saturate their soul cores, thus vastly elevating their power. Something like that had probably never happened in history, at least not on that scale. There were plenty of memories and echoes to go around, too. There were also more and more sleepers who had survived their first nightmares. There were so many, in fact, that the approaching winter solstice would most likely become a breaking point in the entire campaign. In a matter of weeks after that fateful day, the number of awakened in the evacuation army was going to tremendously swell, perhaps even double. In the meantime, though, in one of the 3 defensive sections of East Antarctica, government forces were stubbornly holding against the endless assaults of nightmare creatures under the leadership of Wake of Ruin. Effie and Kai were doing great for themselves. The Wolves and the Nightsingers, as well as their commanders, were known as the hammer and anvil of the evacuation army by now. Their fame and reputation were growing with each passing day, even though each victory was made a little bitter by the casualties that the 2 companies suffered. In the second defensive section, Clan Song was quietly creating one miracle after another. Strangely enough, it was Seishin's name that was mentioned most often. The 3 saints might have had overwhelming battle power, but Seishin seemed to be the one actually managing the war effort. Jet periodically updated Sunny on what was happening in Song's territory, so while he did not know all the details, he at least knew that the situation there was mostly under control. And then there was the third defensive section, the one where the great clan Valor and Sunny himself were located. Things were manageable here too. Morgan and Nephi's had become like 2 goddesses for the refugees crammed into the siege capitals. Their fame had outshone even that of the saints, 2 beautiful sisters, one wisely leading the soldiers from the back, the other never leaving the front lines. It was a compelling image. While forces of valor were strong enough to resist most attacks, it was Changing Star and her fire keepers that were always sent into the most dire and important battles. For now, they had not failed to secure a victory once. Their numbers had diminished a lot since their arrival to the southern quadrant, but not because of casualties. Instead, several cohorts of the fire keepers had already ventured into the seeds, aiming to become ascended. Unknown to most people, there was also a third pillar to the success of the Valor contingent, Cassie. While no one except for a select few knew of the importance of her role, the quiet oracle was indispensable in building the strategy of the defending forces. Her ability to gather and swiftly analyze information from a multitude of scattered sources, keen mind, and supernatural intuition were tools that allowed Morgan to drastically increase the efficiency and effectiveness of her command. Meanwhile, the House of Night was doing its part as well. From rare messages sent by Neve, Sunny knew that the naval convoys traversing the oceans had faced many difficulties. There had been several tragedies, but overall, more and more refugees were reaching safety in the other 3 quadrants. So the situation was dire, but things seemed to be going fine in Antarctica. Of course, Sunny knew that it was only a facade. Behind that facade, the bloody feud between Valor and Song was growing more and more violent, threatening to spill into utter disaster. The forward scouts of both great clans were hunting each other in the dream realm. Out here in the waking world, there were more and more ambushes and attempts at sabotage. Powerful awakened warriors were killed by other humans instead of nightmare creatures. Most of it happened far away from the siege capitals, for now. And yet, Sunny had been pretty busy in the past few weeks. It was hard to do the things he wanted to do while remaining unnoticed, but he managed with the help of shadow step and shadow manifestation, somehow. He could traverse great distances swiftly at night while riding Nightmare. As such, his hunting grounds were not limited to a single siege capital. In fact, Sonny had made an effort to limit his activity to a minimum there, as well as in any area where he showed his face by following Morgan. He ambushed the ambushers. He assassinated the assassins. He killed members of both valor and song without distinction, leading both forces to believe that it was the enemy who had possessed hidden forces in the region. Sonny had struck several more times after the massacre at the underground factory. He had thought that it would make him feel good, but it didn't. The things he did were not pleasurable. There was a rush and a satisfaction of a clean kill, but at the same time, there was disgust and an overwhelming sense of what a waste this whole mad disaster was. It was just something that had to be done. And even then, as time passed, Sonny was starting to lose sight of why he was even doing these things. Was it all futile? It sure seemed that way. And so, every time he happened to be near a port fortress, Sonny liked to watch the ships depart. This, at least, was something obvious, a palpable result. With each vessel that sailed away, more refugees were taken away from this hell. He climbed the walls of the fortress to watch the ships leave today, too. This time, however, something felt different. It was as though a sudden tension permeated the air. Sonny sighed. He felt as if things were about to change. Sonny was watching the battleship move across the tumultuous surface of the ocean. But of course, he was watching other things at the same time as well. His shadows were spread throughout the port fortress, absorbing all kinds of information. One was hidden in the barrel of an overheated rail gun, watching nightmare creatures lay siege to the walls of the stronghold. A deathly downpour of projectiles, both mundane and magical, was falling on the surging mass of attacking abominations. Figures of knights could be seen within the horde, moving to eliminate the most dangerous targets. St. Gilead was also there, clad in a suit of lustrous armor, facing the nightmare creatures like a bastion of immovable courage and steel. It was a familiar scene. Another shadow was with the refugees who were nervously waiting for their turn to board the ships. The sounds of the battle were too oppressive to talk freely, but they couldn't help but whisper, sharing their fears and hopes. Sonny listened carefully, assessing the changes in the mood of the civilians, as well as how they perceived the conflict. From time to time, he managed to learn something interesting from the rumors spreading among the refugees. A third shadow was with Nephis, who had entered the field hospital beneath the fortress wall some time ago. She was kneeling in front of a bloodied stretcher, holding her hands above the terrible wounds covering the body of a mundane soldier. A soft radiance emanated from beneath her skin, and the wounds of the young man were swiftly closing. Her face was motionless and pale. There were many people behind her who had been in the throes of suffering not too long ago, but were now healthy and whole. They were looking at her with eyes in which indescribable relief mixed with awe and reverence in equal measure. The fourth shadow was with Sonny himself. And of course, the fifth shadow was slowly making its way into the sealed chamber where Morgan had gone a dozen or so minutes ago. Usually, Sonny would not risk getting that close to the Princess of War when she really wanted to keep her conversations private. But today was a special day. It was not because the main force of Clan Valor had left their designated siege capitals and assembled in this pot fortress to give battle to a large horde of migrating nightmare creatures. Things like that happened from time to time, when it was more advantageous to deal with the threat sooner rather than later. No, it was because today, Saint Maddock had returned from his clandestine mission in the territory of Clan Song. To this day, Sonny was not sure whether Ascended Bast was truly the current vessel of Mordred, one of his reflections, or simply a diversion meant to sow confusion among his enemies. At times, Sonny had felt certain that the bleak man was none other than the Prince of Nothing, but he still harbored some doubt. Whispering Blade was going to dispel his doubts once and for all. The shadow did not manage to enter the sealed room. Doing so would have alerted Morgan about its presence. But it did manage to slither into a service duct running above it and peek inside through the small gap in the ceiling insulation. Sonny frowned as he watched the ocean, noticing a disaffectionate expression on St. Madoc's face. The fearsome transcendent was talking, his voice even. Waiting for me. It was a trap from the very beginning, which would not have been too inconvenient if Ascended Bast was indeed the abomination. However, he was not. I confirmed it. Morgan leaned back inside. Still, it couldn't be helped. We had to eliminate the possibility. She lingered for a few moments, then asked, "How serious was the trap?" A faint smile appeared on St. Madoc's face. Throwing a quick glance at the young woman, he chuckled. "You don't have to worry about this old man, Morgan. Silent Stalker and Dire Fang were there. I could not leave without saying a proper goodbye, though, so they'll have a few new scars to brag about." Many kilometers away, Sonny tilted his head a little. Such arrogance. However, was it really arrogance if Madoc was powerful enough to back up his words, and lethal enough to make each of them count? Regardless of that, one question remained. If Ascended Bast had nothing to do with Mordred, then where the hell was that bastard really? In the sealed room, Morgan echoed his thoughts. The situation is problematic then. None of the divinations managed to pinpoint his location. Either Queen Kai was generous enough to bestow that person with a truly powerful obscuring memory, or he has some means of avoiding our gaze of his own. It is strange, though. How could a mere master achieve such a thing? Madoc frowned. We weren't able to confirm his ascended ability. Maybe it has something to do with that. You can't forget what rank his aspect is, Morgan. Not paying attention to a dark expression on his niece's face, Whispering Blade added, "He might be closer than we think, too. These strange attacks we suffered recently, weren't our diviners strangely unable to ascertain anything about them? It can't be a coincidence." Morgan remained silent for a while, then shook her head. "There is some correlation, but the pattern doesn't fit. More than that, the countermeasures we have in place to confirm the identities of our ascended showed no anomalies. We can't check every refugee, mundane soldier." And awakened, of course. Madoc thought for a few moments. What about that government brute, Ascended Sunless? A slight smile appeared on Morgan's face. "Who do you take me for? He was the first one I checked. We have studied him thoroughly after the Night Temple incident as well. Ascended Sunless is certainly not ordinary. His SS designation, service record, and age should attest to that, but he is definitely himself, and not that abomination's vessel." Sonny frowned. Valor seemed to possess some kind of tool capable of determining whether one was possessed by Mordred or not, even if its function seemed to be limited to a small number of people. Nevertheless, he had been one of the people they checked. When the hell had that happened? He had not even noticed anything. Back in the sealed room, Morgan frowned. "So where is the creature hiding?" At that moment, the door suddenly opened, and someone walked inside. Both Morgan and Madoc looked at the newcomer with surprise. "Kasha, how bold of you to come here without invitation." The Princess of War smiled dangerously. At the same time, Madoc raised an eyebrow. "You'd better have a good explanation for this interruption, young lady." Cassie lingered for a few moments, appearing somewhat nervous. Then she said in a tense voice, "There is a message for you. I think you should come outside. Now this is interesting." Sonny was stealthily making his way to the isolated inner courtyard of the port fortress. His shadows were on the move, too. The one who had been observing the battle against the horde of nightmare creatures was flying across the battered surface of the wall, not paying any attention to the flashes of firing armaments. The one who had been hiding among the refugees had left them behind, approaching the courtyard from the other direction. The one that had been spying on Morgan hid itself within Cassie's shadow, and the one that had been following Nephi's remained within hers. Currently, all of them were converging on a single point. In the middle of the courtyard, surrounded by a wide ring of empty space, a long figure stood as numerous soldiers, and awakened aimed their weapons at it. Intricate armor of black steel, a beautiful face framed by curls of raven-black hair, and vivid, vibrant vermilion eyes. It was Morgan. Don't tell me. As the real Morgan emerged from the gates of the stronghold in the company of Maddock and Cassie, the soldiers that were aiming at the invader looked at her with wide eyes. They must have realized that the creature standing in front of them was not the real princess of war, and yet, seeing the two identical young women stare at each other was an eerie experience. The real Morgan gritted her teeth in contempt. The reflection perfectly mirrored her expression. And that was what the lone figure was, a creature created by Mordred from a piece of his soul, similar to how he had created the mirror beast. The real Morgan's hand rested on the hilt of her sword, but the reflection was holding a black lacquered box in it instead. Despite the hundreds of rifles and enchanted weapons aimed at the mirror creature, it seemed perfectly calm. Nephi's entered the courtyard and stopped, looking at the bizarre scene with a reserved expression. Sonny had appeared from the shadows too, keeping out of sight as he observed the situation. What is that crazy bastard doing? His gaze slid across the faces of everyone gathered in the courtyard. The mundane soldiers and awakened retainers of valor, a few knights, Nephi's, Cassie, Maddock. Was Mordred among them right now, somewhere, enjoying their reactions? As the reflection tilted its head a little, the real Morgan snarled. "How dare you wear that face, you vile thing?" Her face was a mask of revulsion and fury. This time, the mirror creature failed to reflect her expression. Instead, it smiled pleasantly, then bowed and gently placed the lacquered box on the ground. Then the reflection opened its mouth and spoke, its voice indistinguishable from that of Morgan. "A present for my dear sister." Then its smile widened a little. "Come soon, I missed you a lot." Before Maddock could stop Morgan, she suddenly disappeared from where she had stood. Her speed was too great for the mundane soldiers and the awakened warriors to trace with their naked eyes, but Sonny saw it, a black and red blur that cut across the courtyard, approaching the reflection with the speed of a bullet. He knew better than most how terribly dangerous these creatures were, so Sonny expected to see a tremendously destructive fight. He even prepared to retreat, but to his surprise, the dire battle never happened. It was not because Morgan revealed one of her hidden trump cards, and neither was it because Maddock intervened. Instead, it was simply because the reflection did not even try to defend itself. It just stood there, smiling pleasantly, as Morgan's sword pierced the breastplate of the black armor and exited from the creature's back. Slowly, a net of thin cracks appeared on the skin of the reflection. Morgan's eyes widened slightly as she watched the perfect copy of her face slowly crumble into a rain of glass shards, which then disappeared without a trace in a flash of silver light. Just like that, one of Mordred's reflections was destroyed. Nevertheless, Sonny's frown only deepened. So he wanted to deliver a message. What message could it be? Without a doubt, the ability of the reflection to appear in the very heart of one of Valor's strongholds without anyone noticing was a message in and of itself. It was as if Mordred was mocking his family, pointing out that no amount of guards and protections could save them from his wrath. Forcing Morgan to watch herself be destroyed was a message, too. Mordred was hinting that this was her inevitable future. And of course, the actual message was the black lacquered box and the words the reflection had spoken. "A present for my dear sister. Come soon, I missed you a lot." All of it was one immaculate provocation. However, just what was inside the box? As Sunny watched, Morgan sheathed her sword with a dark expression and looked down. Maddox slowly approached, looking at the box with wariness. Cassie and Nephi's got closer, too. Could there be something dangerous inside? Cassie's voice sounded tense. Morgan glanced at her silently, and then leaned forward to pick up the box. It was as if she was trying to show that there was nothing that Mordred could do that she would be afraid of. Without hesitating, she opened the box and looked inside. Morgan's impression subtly changed. The insides of the box were upholstered in red silk, and on that silk rested a human skull. The skull was covered in soot to appear black, and there was a rough hole made in its forehead, as if to resemble a third eye. There was a long moment of silence, and then Whispering Blade suddenly thrust his hands into the box and picked up the morbid gift that Mordred had left behind. His face was strangely grim. As Maddox studied the skull, Morgan looked at him with a silent question. "What is it?" The saint gritted his teeth. Then he gently placed the skull back on the red silk and said, "It's Dad. It's Dad's head." Like a demon of chaos, Mordred had appeared out of nowhere and thrown everything into utter disarray. Antarctica, which had been like a powder keg for a while now, finally exploded into a conflagration of violence because of the macabre gift that he had delivered to his sister in an elegant lacquered box. Sunny had not realized the full complications of what had transpired in the courtyard of the port fortress until some time later. He knew that Knight Dad was a highly regarded ascendant of Clan Valor who had been entrusted with an extremely important mission in the Dream Realm. So, he simply assumed that Clan Song managed to pull off another victory in the simmering conflict. This was important, of course, but not groundbreaking in and of itself. However, his misconception was corrected by a short message from Jet. "Our colleagues from Ravenheart are mobilizing their forces. They seem pretty angry." He stared at the screen of the communicator for a few moments, frowning. What? Why would Clan Song be preparing to make a big move in a hurry if the death of Knight Dad was a part of their plan? And why would they be angry? Unless, of course, what Mordred had done was not something they expected, or even went directly against their machinations. Sunny's eyes narrowed slightly. Don't tell me. Had Beastmaster, perhaps, received something like that black lacquered box as well? What the hell is that madman doing? Feeling an ominous premonition, Sunny deactivated the communicator and hastened his steps. He was walking across the inner courtyard, where the confrontation between Morgan and the Reflection had happened not too long ago, heading toward the main keep. His shadows were already inside. They were trying to get closer to Morgan, Maddox, Nephi's, and Sir Gilead, who had all gathered for an emergency meeting after the discovery of Tad's skull. Taking a considerable risk, he eventually managed to gain access to their conversation and learn a few more things about what Mordred's message really meant. Sunny's frown deepened. Black Skull Citadel. So the scouts sent into the Nightmare Desert by Valor had managed to discover a working gateway somewhere in its depths. The clan in possession of a citadel would gain a staggering advantage in the task of reaching the tomb of Ariel, so Morgan and Maddox had put a lot of effort into keeping that information secret. They had even kept reinforcements to a minimum to not risk revealing Knight Dad's location through irregular troop movements. And yet, Mordred had somehow managed to not only learn of the clandestine mission, but also intercept and slaughter the force tasked with capturing the citadel, including the powerful master in charge of it, which would logically mean that the Black Skull had fallen into Song's hands. However, it had not. That much was apparent from the fact that Song was mobilizing their forces in a great hurry. If Sunny knew of it, then Morgan surely knew as well. So if neither Valor nor Song controlled the citadel. Then who the hell did? The answer was obvious. It was Mordred alone, which might as well have as meant that the Black Skull Citadel was currently empty. No matter how powerful the Prince of Nothing was, a single master was like an ant when compared to the might of a great clan. Even with a divine aspect in his reflections, Mordred was incapable of keeping what he had stolen. Even though he was holding the key to the Nightmare Desert in his hands, he was not strong enough to defend it. So by delivering Tad's skull to Morgan, he had painted a target on his back. The true meaning of his message was, "Come and get me." And if Sonny knew anything about Mordred, then the message sent to Song would have been like so. "Come before they get me." Basically, from the moment the Prince of Nothing revealed that he had usurped the Black Skull, the two great clans were in a race to take it from him first. But why had he done it? There was a pace and cadence to the conflict between Valor and Song. It was a complicated dance that followed a subtle but ruthless logic. Awakened, Masters, and even Saints were like game pieces. By moving pieces around the board, advancing and retreating, both sides were delivering small wounds to the enemy and trying to maneuver into an advantageous position. Currently, the game was nearing the end of its early stage. Both clans were still acting with caution, laying the groundwork for the true assaults that would happen in the future. They were not even done struggling to secure advantages. Mordred's actions had destroyed that pace and made a mockery of that cadence. He had single-handedly put both sides in a position where they were forced to throw away their carefully prepared plans, abandon caution, and move the timetable of the conflict forward, switching from careful maneuvering to an all-out war. Clan Song was mobilizing their forces, and because they were, Clan Valor would move as well. Awakened, Masters, and even Saints, all of them were going to be sent on the battlefield to secure the Black Skull, which was free for the taking, provided that you got to it first. Sonny did not know which Nightmare Gate led to the area where the Citadel was located, but it would soon become the most dangerous place in all of East Antarctica, and maybe even the whole world. That crazy bastard. He was honestly a little shaken by the magnitude of the consequences that Mordred's brazen stunt had caused. The whole landscape of the conflict between Valor and Song had suddenly and drastically changed. That dire change was so fundamental that it was hard to conceive of its true scope, let alone calculate what would happen as a result. The sudden nature of it all was quietly overwhelming. Sonny entered the keep of the port fortress and took a few deep breaths. While the shift in the nature of the conflict that Mordred had caused was startling, strictly speaking, it was not necessarily a bad thing. Sure, it could end up being catastrophic, but it could also end up being a blessing in disguise. There were many factors to consider, but as far as Sonny was concerned, one was the most important. Where the damned Nightmare Gate was located. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.